Hey friend, Graham here from recordingrevolution.com. Hope you're doing well. In today's video, I want to help you mix faster. Specifically, I want to give you a workflow that I use to help me get multiple mixes done faster. I'm a fan of mixing one song at a time, but if you find yourself where you have a bunch of client work, which is probably a great thing right now, or if you're just trying to finish your own EP or album and you got to mix 5 to 10 to 12 songs over a condensed period of time, I want to share with you the way I like to approach it that helps me get more done in less time. This isn't the only way to approach mixing multiple mixes faster, but this has served me really, really well for about 20 years as I've been figuring this out. So let's dive in. Tip number 1 is to create a mix template. That's right. Some people hate to use that word template, but my friends, the best of the best, the ones that have to work fast, generally work off of templates. And this stemmed from back in the day when you had a console that you left the knobs generally in place and you left the masking tape in place and you left certain pieces of rack equipment patched in place, not for 100% of the mix, but got you 80% of the way there, where you always patched in your kick drum on that channel because it kind of already had some EQ for kick drum, and you always patched in the lead vocal on that channel because it was already pre-routed to a reverb that you liked and you knew sounded good for most vocals. This was always a good starting point for mixers on a console. You got to do the same thing for yourself. This is what I don't like about DAWs, digital audio workstation, software, Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, whatever, is that we've been trained when you open it up to kind of start from scratch with a fresh piece of code, with a fresh session. And while that feels clean, it's like reinventing the wheel every single time. So here's what your mix template should include. And it can include lots of things, but some basics that it should include. A master fader or your mix bus with your favorite go-to plugins on that master fader. If there's always a mix bus compressor you like to use, or a saturation plugin you like to use, or even a limiter that you like to turn on at the end of your mixes and finish your mixes, whatever you find yourself always putting on the mix bus, go ahead and load up a mix bus with those settings to at least get you started. Also include reverbs and delays that you tend to reach for. I'm a guy that almost always generally has some kind of slap delay and then a longer delay, maybe a muted quarter note delay. I generally have a room reverb for at the very least my drums, and sometimes I'll put guitars or even bass or even vocals through it. But if you find yourself with a couple of reverb settings, delay settings you like, keep them in there. And then maybe some group tracks like a drum bus, a guitar bus, a synth bus, a vocal bus that you tend to route tracks to, and you might process them. I tend to always EQ and compress my drums on a drum bus the exact same way 99% of the time. So yeah, I might as well put that plugin right there. I did a whole video on just how to create a mix template in more depth inside of my DAW. So I will link to that here on the video screen somewhere and below in the description. So go watch that video and see a more step-by-step breakdown on how to create a mix template. But for today's purposes, take some time to build one if you haven't before and use that as a starting point. It will save you a ton of time whether you're mixing one song or 100 songs. Tip number 2 is to schedule time to just edit your songs before you mix them. This might sound counterintuitive, but you won't believe how much time you will save in the mixing phase if you have just blocked off a half a day or a few hours to do your editing for your entire album or for the entire client work that you're doing and get all of that out of the way. The last thing you want to be doing when you are mixing and making creative decisions like reverb and effects and tonal balance with EQ and compression is to have to fix timing or tuning or just a sloppy performance that could have been comped together better. If you do edits as you mix, it pulls you out of that right brain creative mode and pulls you into that left brain sort of analytical, is it correct or incorrect mode. And both are important to a professional sounding mix, but blending the two is a serious no-no because it just slows you down. If you want to mix faster, you really need to dedicate some time to getting all your edits out of the way so that when you come time to mix, all you think about is mixing. And this is how the pros do it. Andrew Sheps, Chris Lord-Alge, they all, if they're lucky, have assistants who do this for them. But even if you and I don't have an assistant, and I don't have a mixing assistant, the process and the reason behind having an assistant do all their edits and clean up for them is sound, which is you want the edits to be done with a sort of analytical, linear mind so that it's nice and clean and tidy and tuned and aligned as needed and still sound musical. That way, when it comes time to mix, Andrew and Chris, they're just mixing fast. They're just making creative decisions. They're just responding to the music, not thinking, that's a little out of tune. That drum feels a little late. That's just a totally different headspace to be in. So dedicate that time to get that editing out of the way first so that when you get to the actual mixing phase, it goes super quick. Bonus tip related to that, in your DAW of choice, your software where you're editing and mixing, always save as. So you finish the recording, or maybe you received recordings from a client. When you go to edit it, first save as that song edit before you do any edits to the song. So when you make any edits, tuning, timing, or what have you, if you screwed up and it's hard to undo or hard to see what you messed up, or the client doesn't like the way you tuned it and you didn't somehow keep an untuned version, you can always reopen the original session that hasn't been edited, right? So you have the original session that you save as, then you do your edits, and then when you're done with the edits, save as the name of the song, mix. And that way you can always go back to the raw edited version and start a fresh mix from scratch, knowing that it's timed up and tuned up, and you don't have to be like, well, I don't know how to go back in time. It's almost like having a time machine if you save as you go. Tip number 3 for getting multiple mixes done faster is to schedule your mixes and have a plan. If that sounds obvious, give me a moment. Most of us don't schedule mixing. Why not? We're musicians. We're creatives. We don't like to schedule jack. We just want to show up and play. But my friend, when it comes time to mix, this needs to be on your calendar, and you need to know how much time is it going to take you. You'll only know this by previous mixing experience. So if you have found that over time, it takes you about 4 hours to mix a song, then block off 4 hours. It might take you more, it might take you less, but if that's your average, block off in your calendar 4 hours per mix. So if you have about 8 hours, or let's say 9 hours in a full day to devote to it, say I'm gonna do 2 mixes today and schedule it. Then when it comes time to mix, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't just willy-nilly, maybe I'll start with reverb, maybe I'll start with the kick drum, maybe I'll start with a vocal. I'm not a big fan of just like, where's the mix going? Let me just play with it. Have a plan, have a structure of what you're gonna do first, second, or third. So let me give you a couple examples. One simple breakdown of how to do a mix if you're gonna do it in 4 hours, let's say, or if that's the amount of time it typically takes you, is hour 1, quick mix and overall balance. Right? This is my favorite hour of mixing, by the way. You just loop the song and you just start to react with faders and panning and just react to the song, get a quick overall balance. Hour 2, fine tuning. This is where you're starting to bring in EQ and compression and mix bus processing, the stuff that's really bringing the mix together. That's the heavy lifting of the mix when we think about mixing with plugins, but it's still sort of the bread and butter, just taking your balance and making it better. Then take a break, because we're humans and not robots. Hour 3 should be the creative decisions like reverbs, delays, automation, different mix tricks, different effects to just keep the song really interesting. I call this sweetening as well, making the song really, really engaging from start to finish. And hour 4, final tweaks and checking your mix on multiple speakers, headphones, in mono, things like that. If you want an even more detailed breakdown of mixing, there's actually 8 steps I follow, and they are as follows. Step 1 is all about organizing your session. So color coding, naming, aligning tracks to make sure that they are nice and lined up and you can sort of group them and they work well together. So organize your session, step 1. Step 2 is gain staging. This is where you start to address the actual volume or gain, not on the faders, but on the actual track itself, the waveform itself, to make sure that the tracks are not too hot or too quiet, and that they're at a sweet spot before they hit any plugins and before they do any routing. Gain staging is boring, but so important. I've been talking about it for years, but that is step 2. Step 3 is what I call the static mix, where you're just mixing with faders and pan pots. There's no plugins, there's no effects. You're just starting to create a balance. Step 4 is mix bus processing. So now that we have a good balance and it's gain stage and organized, let's put our first plugins and put them on the master fader or the mix bus so we get the most bang for our buck. This is something I call top down mixing. You put effects at the top of the chain and it trickles down. The sound trickles down to all the tracks at the bottom, and so you get a benefit on everything just by putting a couple of plugins at the top. After that, step 5 is EQ. This is your most powerful plugin that you own. It is going to change the scope and tone and balance of your mix, so dedicated an entire step to EQ. Step 6 is compression. Compression is super powerful, almost as powerful as EQ, but it's like the second best thing to EQ, and you want to compress where and as needed. Step 7 are going to be your reverbs and delays, so your ambient effects. Now that you have a well-balanced, tonally balanced and compressed and exciting and just crisp, great mix, is it too dry? Does it need to have a certain sense of space, room, or sort of affected delays? And finally, step 8 is automation and sweetening, like I mentioned before. You can automate anything and everything: panning, volume, effects. Sweetening is where you start to bring in elements throughout the song. The song sounds great as a concept and statically in any one moment of the song, but does it sound great linearly over time? That's the creative sort of input you add at the very end. And a bonus tip for the scheduling and the actual mix part is to set a timer for 45 minutes to 60 minutes to just go off your phone or whatever, to just buzz every 45 to 60 minutes to get you to stop and to remind you that A, the clock is ticking, which helps you stay focused. You gotta have a ticking clock, otherwise you're gonna really get off track and you'll be like EQing the hi-hat for 2 hours, or like the tambourine. That's like always where it tends to go, like getting that tambourine sounding perfect, when it's like, dude, just like pull it way, way down and it's there. It's easy to lose focus when mixing, so setting a timer sort of reminds you to stay on track. It also reminds you to take breaks, let your ears rest so that they aren't too compressed and you can hear properly. Tip number 4 is to wait for any mastering until you've done all the mixes. And this is assuming you're mixing a collection of songs, an album, or an EP. Get all the mixes done, stay in the mix phase, and then wait till a separate stage for mastering, because the point of mastering isn't to just change the mix, it's to create consistency from song to song to song so they all sound good together on an album or an EP. So save that for later. And final tip, I've kind of said it a couple times, but take breaks. Mixing is not as objective as you think. You are not as objective as you think. Over time, our ears get compressed. Over time, we get used to the way our speakers or headphones sound, and so we stop losing objectivity. That's the biggest fight for a mixer, especially if you have multiple mixes. So the only way to counteract that is twofold. 1, take breaks so that you give your ears a rest. 2, listen on different speakers, even throughout the mix, to just wake your ears up. If you're used to a certain EQ curve on your speakers, play something through, or the same song through a different set of speakers as a totally different EQ curve. It just wakes you up and reminds you that, oh, you've just gotten used to the way this sounds. And third and final is, you can tweak all day long and finish a mix all day long, but don't make a final decision on a mix until the next day. Even if you mixed 5 songs in a day somehow, come back the next day and listen to them with fresh ears and make those final 2 or 3 tweaks that you hear instantly the next morning. There's something magical about having gotten away from the song and come back to it the next day to hear what you were missing in the first place. And finally, I want to give you something. If you thought that this was helpful and you wanted to know more about sort of my mixing process, earlier I talked about the 8-step mixing process that I follow. Well, I have an entire printout for you with a little bit more details on that 8-step mixing process in a form of a checklist. It's called my mixing checklist, and you can get it for free at mixingchecklist.com. How creative is that? Mixingchecklist.com. You can download that printable, and also you'll get some multi-track stems that you can practice mixing on. So if you actually need some help, some practice or some music to work on in the meantime, download those stems, take the 8-step process, apply that to that mix and your other mixes, and you'll be able to get some more reps under your belt. So again, free PDF checklist for those 8 steps at mixingchecklist.com is my gift to you. Hope this video was helpful. If so, give me a like, give me a thumbs up, let me know in a comment below. I would love to know, how many steps do you have in your mixing process, and how have you figured out how to get the most out of your mixing journey when you're sitting down to mix a lot of songs? I know everyone's different. This is what's worked for me for a long, long time. Stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you on another video real soon.